Hey everybody, thank you so much for coming. So my name is Jarom Vogel. I'm a freelance illustrator based in the Portland, Oregon area, actually like 15 minutes north of Portland, but doesn't really matter that much. And so I'm going to show you how to create probably part of this illustration today. I think we have an hour and a half. But we're just going to kind of go over from sketch to how we block in those colors, work on shading and different things like that in Vectornator. So we will just go get started in a new document. So this is the home screen for Vectornator. I'm just going to hit this plus over here and then say new document. And we're going to use a custom size. I already have this preset, but I'll just show you how to make that. So I'm going to hit custom size here. And then you'll get this little panel on the right side that will let you name your document if you want to. So we'll just call this Vectornator demo. And I am using a keyboard attached to my iPad here, by the way. I'll kind of talk to you about why I would want to do that a little bit more later, but just so you know. And then we're going to make this 1080 by 1350. So points, if you're not familiar with vector, is sort of a stand-in for pixels. And you can change this to pixels if you want to, I think. But when you're working in vector, it doesn't matter a lot until you actually go to export it to an image format. The main thing that we're worried about here is the aspect ratio. So we want this to be a 4:5 aspect ratio, and we're just going to switch that back to points for now. And if you want to, you can save that as a custom template and give it a name. So I already did that, so I'm not going to worry about it. But then I'm just going to hit create, and now we have our document. So you can see, you can move that around. One thing that I really like about Vectornator is you can also rotate the canvas as you work, which can be nice just for kind of getting a different angle on things. I don't really like having the name and the rulers here. So if you want to turn those off, you can go into this little ellipses menu up here and hit settings, and then just go to canvas, view, and turn off the things that you don't want to see. I'll leave touches on so you can see what I'm doing on the screen a little bit better. And I think that's all I want to turn off right now. Oh, I do want to turn off snapping as well. So if you're following along, these can be really useful for different things, but because I'm doing kind of a free form illustration, I don't really want these to be turned on right now. So I'm just going to make sure all of the snapping is off. And then we will just get started. So you can see I have this blank canvas. I'm going to hit this little plus icon up here, and then go down to my favorites album where I've already saved that sketch that I made earlier. And that just puts it directly on the canvas, fills the whole size because we matched the aspect ratio already. And then I'm going to come in here, and I want this to just sit on top and not get in my way. And I want to be able to see through it a little bit better. So I'm going to lower the opacity. So in this layers panel over here, I'm just going to tap on this 100% and say maybe 30%, hit enter, and you can see that lowered the opacity of my sketch. And then I'm going to lock that layer. So now as I work, that layer isn't going to get in my way. I won't accidentally move the sketch or adjust its size or anything like that. But then because that whole layer is locked, we're going to need a new layer to work on. So I'm just going to hit this plus in the top right and hit new layer. And you can also name these. I don't actually work with a ton of layers when I'm working in vectors. Depending on how organized you want to be, you can do that. So I'm just going to rename this to sketch. And then I want this to be on top. So we're going to grab this other layer. Oh boy. And then hopefully drag it down. I don't know why that's not working. Drag that down underneath. So now we have the sketch on top, and we have our kind of working layer underneath that. So if I was going to have time to create this whole artwork right now, I'd probably create a separate layer for this girl in the middle, and then a separate layer for the background at least. So we'll just rename this to girl. And we'll be primarily working on her. We'll see how time goes. I think we have an hour and a half here. And then we can close that layers panel. And then I'm just going to be using the pen tool mostly. So let's talk about the keyboard versus the touch gestures, by the way. So one of the things that I really like about Vectornator is that it's really well thought out for using touch gestures and things like that. So you don't necessarily need a keyboard. So I'm keyboardless for a moment here, and you can just work directly on your canvas and then use like a single finger to switch between like broken handles and things like that, which would work a lot like the option key if you're using a keyboard. I don't know why that keeps doing that. But because touch screens can be a little bit finicky sometimes, those touch gestures aren't quite as reliable. So if you have the option to use a keyboard attached to your iPad while you work, I think it does make things a little bit smoother sometimes. But like this entire illustration originally I did without a keyboard, just completely touch gestures and things like that. But the other nice thing is if you have a keyboard up, it's really easy to switch between tools. So I just hit the S key to switch over to that. I can't remember exactly what this is called. Node tool, maybe? Direct selection tool in some programs. But this one that lets you adjust individual little vector nodes. And instead of having to jump back and forth with your pen or Apple Pencil or finger or whatever that is. Okay, so I'm going to switch this over to, let's see, this is a cool thing. You can just tap and hold on the stroke over here and say swap fill and stroke. And so now I have no stroke and I do have a fill on that shape. And I want a little bit of a gradient. So I have this palette that I've already made that I can just go and select that gradient. And then if you switch to the move tool, I think it's called, whatever the regular arrow cursor tool is called, that one, then you can go and just move those gradient handles around a little bit. And I do find that having some gradients in your vector kind of makes it feel a little bit more dimensional, maybe. You don't want to get too heavy-handed on these, but if you can do something kind of subtle that can kind of add a little bit of depth to it, which I think can be nice. I guess I don't know how familiar, this is the weird thing about live streams, is I don't know how familiar people are with vector tools in general. So I'm just kind of using the pen tool as though you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't worked in vector before, it is pretty different. And it has kind of some advantages and disadvantages compared to working in raster or something like Procreate or Photoshop, where you're just directly painting pixels. Oh, that keeps jumping around. Well, come back to it later. But basically, the nice thing about working in vector is you can scale things infinitely and you have a lot of control over the shapes, which can be really nice. So let's just use another example of using this pen tool. So this is one of the ways that you can paint in vector. You don't have to work this way, but this is kind of the most control you can get, I think. And it can be a little weird if you've never used it before, but I do think it's worth taking the time to kind of just practice with the pen tool and figure out how it works, because it will give you a lot more control over your shapes. So basically, as you're using that pen tool, you can create these different nodes and kind of drag out to create a curve. So here, I'll just give you another example over here. So you tap to create a shape, drag to kind of create a curve, or tap to create a sharp point. And as you're dragging to create that curve, if you're using a keyboard, you can hold down Option to break that and kind of have a curve on one side and a straight point on the other. Or if you don't have a keyboard, you can just tap one finger on there as you go. Or I think you can do 2 fingers to snap, and 3 fingers does snapping on only one side. So that is a pretty good way to work as well. Anyway, we don't actually want that shape. But like I said, it takes a little bit of practice to kind of get used to how to use that tool, but it's really worth it if you can do that. So I would definitely recommend taking that time to learn that. And Vectornator has some nice tutorials on their website as well if you want to kind of look through that, but hopefully you get the idea just following along here. So I'm going to go back and choose my gradient again, and I'll show you how to make a custom gradient in a minute here. This is a cool little quick menu that comes up as you're working in Vectornator. So when you have that move tool and you have an object selected, you'll see you get this little menu down at the bottom. And I can just tap this and it lets me rearrange it. So you can see I moved it behind this other leg. And so now I have my 2 leg shapes here. And you, like every object when you're working in vector, is its own sort of layer inherently, which is why I don't worry too much about layers as I'm going. So you can use them primarily for like organization and things like that. But as far as like moving different pieces around, you do have to think about them just a little bit differently than you would in other programs. So let's swap that again. And I'm just going to kind of work on, oops, I don't know what I did there. I'm just going to work on this head shape. So again, we're just kind of dragging out to create curves and kind of moving it around as we go. And I'm not going to worry too much about the shape of the top of the head here because it's going to be hidden by the hair. So we really just want to make sure that any part of the head that will be behind the hair is not visible out of the edges and things like that. And it's possible I'll make a mistake and have to go back and fix it later, but I think we'll be okay here. I mean, if you want to be like really thorough and you know, take pride in your work, sometimes I do bother to kind of make the shapes behind make sense, even though I'm the only one who will ever see it. But you know, that's up to you. If you're working with something for animation, sometimes that can be important as well if you're going to be moving the pieces around and things like that. But I think that head shape is okay. Again, I want to use the same gradient, so we're going kind of from this pale yellow to kind of a pale orange, and then back to this move tool. And just with these gradients, I'm kind of trying to think about a little bit of where the light direction is coming from. So I'm imagining that my light source is kind of up here in the top left-ish. Sorry, I'm pointing with my pencil and realize you can't actually see that. So I'm thinking my light is somewhere over here. But because this isn't really hyperrealism, I don't think that it's going to matter a whole lot. Basically, we just want to know that this side of the shape will be a little bit lighter, and then so kind of the top and left will be a little lighter, and the bottom and right will be a little darker. You can see I didn't do that here with this leg because it's going to be, there's a little bit of a cast shadow effect that I'd be having there, where you're not, where basically it would get a little lighter farther away from the body shape instead. But you can kind of figure that out with a little bit of trial and error. But again, this is an advantage of not working with realism, is it doesn't have to be perfect. So you just have to kind of get the idea across. Okay, so, oh, and I'm seeing some questions. When did you first start illustrating? So that's a really good question. I mean, I've been drawing for pretty much my whole life. As far as when did I start illustrating specifically, I decided to switch to an illustration major in school. So that would have been, let's see, 2011 maybe. Kind of committed to it maybe 2013 or so. I was actually studying to be a dentist originally and changed my mind on that one. But as far as illustrating professionally, I've been working as an illustrator since I think 2015 or 2016 was my first illustration job. So what is that, 4 or 5 years, something like that now? Am I doing that math right? Oh, that's 6 years or 7 years. Okay, yeah, so a while. But yeah, it's been really good. I like it. And feel free to ask questions in the chat. I might not see them all just because I'm keeping an eye on the actual drawing, but hopefully I'll be able to catch some of those. But we're just kind of pulling out our shapes here. And then again, we're tapping to create a sharp point there, and then dragging out to create curves. And it can be a little distracting as you go to see kind of the shape come in behind you. But you just need to kind of not worry about that and just focus on the outline. And then you can go back and look at the overall shape when you've closed the path. So the path is this line with all of the nodes on it. And right now it's an open path. So you can see, hopefully on the screen recording, that there's kind of a blue line here. That's where I have an actual path. And then this is sort of an inferred closing here where there's no blue path. So once I tap on my starting point again, that will close the path and make it so I have a nice closed shape. I started working with Vector when I was in school, and everybody thought I was super weird because everyone else was just using Photoshop and I was playing around with like Illustrator and some weird like SVG iPad tools and things like that. I think I used something, it's like some open source tool that doesn't exist anymore. But I always thought it was weird that Illustrator was called that, but was basically only used by the designers. And then Photoshop was used by all the illustrators. It's just like a weird naming thing. But I was the only one I knew that was actually drawing things in Vector back then. But it's kind of a nice way to just kind of get a sense of shapes a little bit more if you haven't tried working this way. And I do think it's fun to kind of branch out and try different things as well. So, I mean, I don't always work in vector and I don't always work in raster, but like if you kind of mix it up, the process sort of informs the work that you're doing just a little bit. And so it can be kind of nice to play with different ways of making things. I don't know why I keep getting, somehow I ended up with 3 nodes there. Okay, so I'm just kind of going back and refining my shape a little bit. So you can see now I have a closed shape because I tapped on my green starting node here. This is kind of hard to see because it's kind of the same color as the rest of the head. So I'm just going to come and choose, let's see. Actually, I'll show you how to make a custom gradient. So you can see I already have gradient selected. You can switch between solid and gradient over here. So solid just switches to that yellow. Gradient creates this gradient. So I have 2 pieces to that. I have my start and end colors here. And so I want to make that start color just a little bit darker, a little bit more orange, and then make this one a little bit more red, maybe a little more saturated. And then we will switch to that move tool, and then I can go move those nodes around. So these correspond to those nodes on the gradient tool. It might not be quite as saturated as I want it to be. So I'll come in here and go back to my tool, switch on this, and saturate that a little bit more, and maybe darken this one a little bit more. Oops. This can be a little tricky to kind of get it right, but hopefully you get the idea. Okay, so I do have this ear shape, the top of the ear that I want to be poking out behind the hair. So I can either create a new shape there, or I can just cut a hole in this shape. I'm probably going to go with cutting a hole, and we'll just sort of see how that works. So I'm going to switch to my pen tool, make sure I don't have anything selected, back to pen, and just kind of create that ear shape. And then if I select 2 different shapes, then I should get some Boolean options to work between those, I think. So let's go back to my move tool. And then if you tap this little check mark, that lets you select multiple objects. So now I have these 2 things selected. And I believe I want this tool here. So down in my little quick menu, it's this circle and square. And I'm just going to hit subtract, and that will subtract the front object from the back object. It looks like my gradient got reset here, so I'm just going to move that back. And then if I tap outside of that, you'll see now I have this hole in my hair shape. You can kind of see that as I move it around. And so technically, I think that makes this a compound path, in case you're curious about the terminology. But one thing I also like to do is just kind of turn my sketch on and off as I go to make sure that the shapes are kind of working right. Sometimes it can be a little hard to see those as you're working with the sketch in the way, even if you turn down the, I've got some orphan curves here. You can see these little boxes with a unbroken line. So sometimes as you're working, you might just end up with a couple of those sitting around due to probably accidentally tapping the canvas in between working on different shapes. I don't know why I'm not getting my nodes here, but oh well. Anyway, sometimes you can see that there's some kind of weird shapes. And honestly, I don't think it's so bad to have kind of imperfect shapes. I think that can make it have a little bit more of a hand-drawn look to it, which can be nice. Okay, sorry, I'm seeing another question here. How do you design your characters? What is this character supposed to be? Oh, those are great questions. So as far as how I design my characters, sorry. A lot of the time I'm just kind of doodling and something will come to me. So this particular one, I think I was listening to some sort of song that was talking about meteors running with meteors or something like that. And I just thought it was kind of a cool idea. And so it kind of came up with this idea. So she's sort of a fire elemental something sort of person, I guess. I don't really have like a backstory with this. Some people will come up with like elaborate stories and things for their illustration. I kind of prefer to just kind of keep it like up to your interpretation. So this one was just kind of fun. Probably sort of inspired by Flame Princess and Adventure Time as well. Big Adventure Time fan, personally. So could be that a little bit of like songs, just a little bit of whatever I'm thinking about. As far as just how to design characters in general, I do think I'm not like a character designer specifically, so don't take this too as your gospel of character design. But I think coming up with like strong shapes and a strong concept can be really important. So a lot of the time in character design, you start with kind of a silhouette. So basically, you're just working with just the shape, no colors, no outlines, or anything like that. And just want to make sure that they read quickly just based on their shape language and things like that. And then you start thinking about colors. So like different types of characters will probably have different colors as well. And just a bunch of different things. Usually I'll just sit down and sketch for quite a while. So just kind of like, maybe I spend half an hour to an hour just drawing things, and maybe 95% of them are going to be bad. Sometimes 100% of them are going to be bad, and that's okay. You just don't show those ones to anybody. But hopefully if you spend long enough and just kind of show up and work, then something is going to turn out well, and will be worth kind of developing more. And I think those ones, like, you just have to show up and kind of do the work, and eventually if you're sticking to it, you'll end up with something that you like. Okay, so I have this arm here, and then we have one more limb to make. I don't know how I keep doing that. So again, we're just kind of dragging this out. And I'll show you how to use a couple of the other tools in a second here. So for like more organic shapes, like some of these flames and things like that, I do like using the pencil tool because it's very quick, and you when I am not as worried about like the specific shape, if that makes sense. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a second here. Or especially if it's something that doesn't have like too much of a mix of like sharps and curves and things like that. Okay, and that one I think is actually pretty close to what I want as far as the gradient goes. So I'll just show you with one of these little flame guys. So I'm going to switch to this pencil tool. If you're using a keyboard, I believe that's W, or you can just tap on it. And then you'll see you get this nice little slider to the right of it. So I like to turn that quite a bit up here because, so this is the smoothing slider. So if you turn it down, you can see as you draw something and then switch to move, it ends up with a lot more nodes in it. And depending on what you're going for, that can be great. But I think usually when I'm using this, it's because I want something pretty organic feeling. So I'm going to turn that almost all the way up and just sort of draw out the shape really quickly. And you can see now if I switch to my move tool, there's quite a bit less nodes in there. And then I'm going to go back to this selection tool, the node tool, I think is what it's called. Use my pen tool to close that shape, and then maybe delete a couple of these. Well, no, it's probably okay. You can just double tap to create a double-sided curve there. And as you go, then I just go in and kind of clean up the shape to make sure it aligns a little more closely with my sketch. So again, this is just different ways of working, and I kind of mix both of these as I'm going. This one doesn't have a lot of sharp points, but if I want a sharp point like up here, you can see right now it's a curve. I can just double tap that to turn it to completely sharp. Can't remember what the actual term for that is, but basically no handles on your node, so you just get like a nice point there. And then again, I'm just going to tap and hold to swap fill and stroke. And then I think I want this one to be kind of a pale yellow actually. And we'll just leave that for now. Okay, and then let's do the dress, I guess. So I'm going to switch over to this pen tool again, get kind of a nice dark blue to start with. And then I'm just going to create kind of this hem first, which will be underneath. And you could do this a couple of different ways. I'm choosing to create it as a shape underneath the dress because I think that might create a little bit of a nice layered effect. Where basically you'll have just a little bit of overlap here. So it looks like two different pieces of fabric maybe. You could also create it as a mask, and we'll definitely get to that in a minute when we get to shading and things like that either way. So I'll kind of go over how to create one of those and why you might want it. I guess clipping mask is the more specific term for that. but again, we're just refining our shape a little bit. That one doesn't want to go where I want it either for some reason. And okay, good enough for now. I might come in and fix that a little more later. It's so weird. Just that specific one. Okay, well, you do you, curve. So I'll just delete that and we will make up for it with these other ones. Have not had that happen before, so I don't know what I'm doing. And then we're going to switch back. Oh, actually, as we're going with that same color, let's make these two little sleeve caps here. So back on the pen tool. And then just this other one as well. Oops. And cool. Okay, so now we're going to create a darker color over the top of this. Back to that pen tool again. And just kind of trying out the shape. And let's go. Okay, sorry, I see a couple more questions. I'll get to them in just a second. Let me finish the shape first. With something like this, so we have kind of a weird overlap situation where we want this sleeve to be in front of this sleeve cap here, but behind it here. So you can either create two different shapes, which is maybe the better option in some ways. But because I already created the shape, I'm just going to kind of fake it here and just overlap in a way that looks like you have it overlapping both ways. You can kind of go either way. Again, if you were working for animation, you definitely want to do this so you have like a different shape here and then this behind shape. But because this is just for demo and just to use the image specifically, I'm not going to worry about it. We're just kind of creating this curve. And we'll go refine that shape a bit more. A little weird here. So again, I'm holding Option on my keyboard to kind of break that curve into an unsymmetrical, asymmetrical, whatever you'd say. So basically your handles can go two different directions instead of being tied to each other. Or you could do that by holding one finger on the screen if you don't have the keyboard. I want this one to be curve. Oh, looks like we ended up with a weird loop here somehow, but it might not matter. Okay. Okay, probably good enough on that for now. So questions I'm seeing here. Let's see. Hi there, you said that you've been working with vectors a few years already. Besides illustrations, do you work with vectors for other applications? Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure that I totally understand what you mean by other applications. I mean, I primarily do illustrations. I mean, I have tried coding vectors a little bit in the past, if that's what you're talking about, which it probably isn't. They are kind of complicated, in case you're curious. But yeah, mostly illustration. I know they can be used for like different math things as well. Oh, that's not letting me. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so as far as my work goes, I'm pretty much just using illustrations, using vector things for illustration. And then I also use raster programs, mostly Procreate, Photoshop, things like that, for creating illustrations as well. And a lot of the time that depends on what the client is looking for. So when you're working with certain clients, they might want vectors for, like, especially if they want to print something large or if they want to have complete control over what size it's displayed at. But one of the trade-offs is it's a little bit easier to create textures with raster-based things, and you can mix them as well. So if you want to, you can create like your shapes with vectors and then put raster shapes inside of them, so you could import them and like kind of create a mask in here or something like that. So you can kind of end up with a little bit of the best of both worlds if you want to. I'm having a hard time. Let's see, I might have to jump into, oh, I've got a lot of these. Whoops. So I'm just getting rid of these orphan curves. Hopefully that answered your question. I'm not sure that I totally understood. Feel free to ask that again if I didn't get it, I guess. And then somebody says, greetings from Ukraine, Jarom, love your works and waiting for 3D tutorials. I know. I am thinking about it, I promise. I keep getting busy with client work though, which is a great problem to have. But it is hard to make time to actually create those 3D tutorials. They take a lot of effort. I mean, even just creating a regular tutorial. And with 3D specifically, it's pretty complicated. So I need to think through a lot of the different aspects of kind of how to best present that and things like that. But it is on my list as soon as I get some time. I just haven't really had time to do it, if that makes sense. But yes, I'm thinking about it. Thank you. Okay, so I think we sorted out our layers here. So you can see I was just kind of moving those different curve shapes around to make sure that they're in the order I want them to. So basically this arm is in the back, the sleeve cap is in front of that, and then the dress is in front, and then I need the head and the hair all in front of those things. I do have kind of a weird little triangular window here. So this is, I don't know if that's a tangent exactly. If you work in design, you're going to hear that term tangent a lot, and it can mean slightly different things, but basically it's kind of an unintentional meeting of 2 points, kind of. So basically you want to avoid things like that. A lot of the time that's going to be something like this, like say you have a shape that accidentally just meets another shape like this, that's going to draw attention to a certain spot that you might not want attention at. Oops, what am I doing here? Here we go. Okay. And then I'm going to create this kind of collar shape here. Oops, don't want that. You do need to be careful when you select a shape and then you go to change a color before creating another shape. You might accidentally end up changing the color of the shape you currently have selected, which is not usually what you want. So I'm just going to create the shape and then make the color later. Oh, I keep creating those little curves. Weird. Okay, so here we go. And again, you can see this is being created in front of that head shape, and we actually want it behind that, so we'll have to move that in a second. Let's see, something like that. Actually, maybe I'll just create that. It can be easy to kind of get messy vector shapes if you have too many control points. So there's a little bit of a balancing act with that you just kind of have to get a feel for. And kind of whether you want to create your corners with a specific node or whether you kind of want to create them implicitly, I think is the word, by kind of having these overlapping control nodes like that. So the control nodes are these handles, and then the nodes themselves are the middle node that changes its position. Okay, but I want this to be probably the same color as those sleeve caps actually. So I'm going to use my eyedropper tool up here and then just choose that. No, I don't know why that didn't work. Let's try that again. Oh, there we go. And then I can grab that. And then we're going to use this to just push it. Oh no, I don't know what just happened there. Sorry. Camera problems, hang on. That was weird. Hang on, I might have to fix this. Sorry, technical difficulties. Where's that test screen? It's so strange. Hang on a second. I should fix this. No, thank you. I think I just had my counterweight break here. And my camera is kind of going to fall down if I let go of it. Sorry about that. I don't really know what happened there. Woo! There it goes again. Wow. Okay, hang on. I think I have my camera set in between two kind of. Okay, thank you. giving some technical advice in the background here. And this should be fine. I just need to make sure it doesn't happen again. Sorry. I have my camera set up in front of my screen here on a tripod, and my counterweight just fell off. So it's kind of on like a boom arm thing. I'm worried that's going to just happen again in a second here, but okay, that should be okay, hopefully. All right, well, if it happens again, I guess more excitement, so stay tuned. Cool. It might be a little bit uneven here, but okay, well, hopefully that will work at least for the rest of this. Okay, we're back. In the meantime, somebody's asking any sources of inspiration you'd like to share. I get this question quite a bit, and it's kind of a it's interesting. I don't know, because it's a big question in a lot of ways. There's not like specific places that I go to for inspiration, I guess, but I think the biggest thing is just kind of having somewhere to write things down as you go, or just kind of like, I don't know, basically go outside, go somewhere different to draw. I don't know, just pay attention to things as you're out and about, songs, movies, books, nature, take pictures of plants, draw things as you get them, write things down. And when you have ideas, it's just kind of a matter of keeping it in mind, I guess, and thinking about like how you can kind of use your life experience in your artwork. And I don't know, that sounds a little utilitarian, maybe a little bleak. Like, also you can go outside and not think about work, and that's fine too. But I do find like a lot of the time my best ideas are kind of when I'm doing something else, as opposed to like sitting down and specifically trying to come up with ideas. Because trying to force it, like it can work, and sometimes you need it to work for client work and things like that, but it's better if those happen naturally. So yeah, I don't know if that's exactly the answer you were looking for, but I mean, yeah, so it's just kind of the different things that you enjoy as a person too. So like, I really like Adventure Time. I really like different video games, books, music. Yeah, it's just all kinds of things. Sorry, I feel like that's kind of a wishy-washy answer, but it's unfortunately there's not really, I mean, hopefully there isn't just like one answer to that for you either, though, as far as like where you get your inspiration. Because I think what makes your artwork interesting is kind of an amalgamation of the different things that make up your life experience too. Where if your inspiration is coming from one or two places, then it's just going to look like kind of a copy of those things, which isn't super great. Anyway, okay, so back to actually drawing this thing after that brief intermission. Sorry about that, everybody. Oops. Okay, I'll get my keyboard set up here again. And that control point just came back for me. Interesting. I feel like I need to keep an eye on that camera in case it's like slipping or something. So far it's not slipping. Good news. I'll keep you all updated. Stay tuned. And I'm glad we could go through this together, I guess the other thing I'd say about inspiration is, and I'm not very good at this, honestly, but I feel like it's really easy to just sort of fill your time with like TV shows and books and podcasts, and just kind of have noise in the background all the time, which like there's nothing wrong with that, and like I said, like that can be a source of inspiration as well. But you also kind of need to give yourself time to think without things like that. And like that can be kind of hard because it's nice to just like turn your brain off when you're not working, you know, to avoid it. I don't know if other people have this, but I feel like a lot of the time when I just let myself think, I'm like replaying awkward conversations from 10 years ago or something like that in my brain all the time, which is not great. But you do kind of need that time to sort of like let your brain actually come up with ideas instead of just listening to things or being exposed to things. So you have to have a little bit of mix of those two, where you're being exposed to new ideas, but also have that time and just sort of space to process it as well. And that's something that I am definitely working on. It's just sort of making that time more. Yeah. Okay. How's our time going? I might need to hurry a little bit on certain aspects of this so I can show some other things. I think I can use the... Oh, this is a cool thing. If you have a keyboard connected, you can just press and hold the command key to see your commands. So if I want to use the eyedropper, I can just hit the eye tool. And I think I can hold that down and then go and select something. Oh, I don't know, that one's not working for some reason. Interesting. Okay, well. Yeah, well, I'll just go select it. I'm all thrown off by the camera falling. That's my excuse. Okay, but we'll just create this boot shape really quickly. So this is going to be a good place to kind of show that mask tool, I think. So you can see we have this bottom part of the boot that I do want to be kind of flush with the shape. So I'll show you how to create a clipping mask in just a second here. And we want to have this little overlap here so it looks like it kind of wraps around the kind of lining of the boot here. And same thing on this side. Okay, so I want to change this boot color to be something more like the color of the dress up there. And then I'm just going to create this shape here, and I'm only worried about the part that falls inside of the rest of the boot. So I'm going to use the pencil tool for this. Just kind of draw that out really quickly, and then the things that don't overlap, you can just go ahead and do whatever you want. And then I'm going to swap the fill and stroke here. Another one of these sneaky little orphan nodes. Okay, so again, I'm going to switch to my move tool, make it so I can select multiple. So now I have the boot and the shape that I want to mask selected. And because the one that I want to mask is in front, then I just have to hit this little mask icon. And now that gets captured inside of that shape. So with that selected, make sure you turn off your multi-select. I can just tap this twice and you can see it enters isolation mode. So I don't know if you can tell on the screen recording, but there's kind of like some diagonal lines outside of the shape that I have selected. So that's my masking parent shape here. And then I can choose the masked kind of captured shape inside. So now I can just hit swap fill and stroke and then change that to, I think, probably that same color, honestly. And then if I tap outside or double tap outside, I think, then you can see now that's nicely clipped there. And if I wanted to, I could move that around inside that shape. And you can see like it still keeps its own whole shape. So you don't have to like clip off the edges. You're just kind of hiding them from view within the containing shape here. That can get a little tricky for editing that containing shape. So just so you know, if you want to edit the containing shape of something that's being used as a clipping mask, you'll need to switch to your move tool and double tap on it to enter this isolation mode with the diagonal lines, and then you can change the shape with the node tool here. Okay, so let's get that other boot in there really quickly, and then we can worry about some of the like more details like the face, the belt, and kind of these shading and things like that, some different pieces. I did just notice I have this weird overlap here that I don't want. Okay, cool. But we'll just make this really quickly. And I might spend a little less time refining shapes just in the interest of time here. Just so you know, usually I would spend a lot of time just kind of fine-tuning all of these, like I'm going to have to tell myself not to do here. Just a little bit. Okay, and then just kind of going in here, creating this. And if I was doing the background, I would have it overlap this foot right here. So I'm going to create the whole foot. But because part of this is going to be overlapped and nobody else will see it, I don't have to worry too much about specifically what that toe looks like. Okay, again, not spending too long refining this, but just double checking that things don't look too bad. Okay, and then we want to switch that to this darker color as well. And okay, so let's talk about how to make this face shape. So when you're working on a character like this, the face can be pretty, I don't know, we're like really tuned to know exactly what a face should look like, basically. So even though this isn't a realistic face that I'm working on, it is still the place where you have to spend the most time worrying about details, because like a very slight curve to the eyebrow in the wrong direction or something can change kind of people's perception of what that expression is. It's really kind of weird, especially working on eyebrows. I find that you have to just like really focus on making the shape exactly what you intend it to be, and kind of mouth as well, just sort of what that curve says about kind of their attitude and things like that. Oops. And somehow that got switched to the wrong color. Somebody asked, was it hard for you to switch careers? And so I mentioned I was actually going to study dentistry at first. So in school, I was studying, I was doing all these pre-dental classes at the same time as my illustration classes. So basically there was no pre-dental major. So it was like, choose whatever major you want. And because I was, I don't know, a little bit stupid or naive or something, I was like, well, I'll study art on the side, even though there's absolutely no overlap and it's probably a bad idea. But basically I got seduced by the arts, depending on your perspective, and decided that being a dentist would be a lot less fun than being an artist. And so it was kind of hard to make that decision. But then later I guess actually also in school, I was working as an IT guy at a local company, which was actually pretty fun. If you've ever seen the show The IT Crowd, that was almost exactly my job. And then that kind of, as I went through school, it was just sort of my school job. It turned into kind of taught myself how to do web development on the side. And at the same company, ended up being able to switch into web development, and then from there to web design, and which was great. So I was really all over the place. I was doing like science and pre-dental courses, and then art courses, and then studying computer stuff at work. And I did really enjoy the coding and things like that, and that's part of why I'm still kind of playing with those things on my own. I don't know, depending on if people are familiar with my Instagram, I like to kind of experiment with like just ways to kind of use code things with my art. So I've made like some augmented reality things and parallax things and stuff like that. Anyway, so I still do enjoy that. As far as like switching to illustration as a career specifically, though, that was at first I was doing it on the side. So I graduated in 2015, got my first freelance job as a side gig. I think it was in 2016, but I don't remember specifically. And then, oops, that just wants to be there. And then I didn't switch to full-time freelance until I think it was August 2018. And it was definitely a bit of a leap of faith at the time, just to say like, okay, I'm going to try this, give it 6 months or whatever, and just see how it goes. We were moving from Utah to Oregon at the time anyway, and it just seemed like a good chance to just sort of give this a real shot. But I had been building up my freelance career in the meantime, so I was working in the evenings a lot on freelance projects, and just sort of making sure that I had sort of some base where I could expect to be making at least some money as a freelancer. But it's still, yeah, it's scary to make that switch altogether. But I do think, at least when I was in school, I felt like there was a certain kind of expectation, and I don't know where I got this idea, but that like you would graduate and you would immediately start working in the field that you studied, which for me was art. And like when I graduated and I wasn't immediately getting illustration work right out of school, I felt like that was a little bit of a failure on my part. But I think it's pretty important to know that that is actually a lot more common than you'd think. So like there's really no shame in having a day job right out of school, or even like longer than that. Like if you're not getting enough freelance work to like make it work as your full-time job, like there is nothing wrong with having another job on the side if you need to do that. Like it happens more than you would probably think. And I think it can be kind of easy to forget that. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, that's a long, rambly answer to your question, but yes and no. I mean, it did fortunately work out really well for me when I switched to full-time freelance, but yeah, everybody's experience is going to be a little bit different there. Okay, so with this face, I'm going to go turn off that sketch layer. I could probably spend a lot more time kind of refining those eyebrow shapes and things like that, but I think this is okay for now. And then I'm going to start working on some shading in places, because I think we have, let's see, how are we doing on time? We have like 40 minutes left, maybe. Does that sound right? And go clean up some of these orphan curves that keep sneaking in there somehow. And you just kind of want to go organize your layers a little bit every once in a while to make sure that things are where you expect them to be in relation to each other as well. So I've got my two eyebrows next to each other. For some reason, one of my eyes is way up here and the other one is down here. So I want to put those together. Same thing with the mouth. Let's go put that down by the eyeballs and the eyebrows. And if you want to, you can, so I'm using 2 fingers to just select all of these objects. And then you can use 2 fingers to select different ones. And I'm just going to create a group out of those. So if I switch to my move tool, you'll get this little quick menu again, and then I can tap this, and now I have a group that is my face group. Oops. Put that multi-select still. So now if I tap that group, I can, should be able to just move that face around. This is a cool thing in Vectornator. You have this little nudge tool. So even if you don't have a keyboard, you can still nudge things. I think I nudged one more to the left. There we go. But I'm going to, let's see, I don't think we've talked about multiply at all yet, or blend modes. So let's get back to that. So I'm going to create this little cheek shape here. And maybe a little bit bigger than I have it in the sketch, just because that seems a little small to me, looking at it now. And then I want to change this to actually kind of a light, let's see, maybe this light yellow. And then over here in my style menu on the right side, so this is a little paintbrush icon, I'm going to go down here to appearance and choose multiply. So if you haven't used blend modes before, they definitely take some getting used to, and kind of usually I think people don't really understand what most of them do, and you just kind of like scroll through and try each one to see if it looks how you want it to. But there are a couple of exceptions. Multiply, so normal basically just means it will just, basically your layer on top will appear in front of the layer behind it, where multiply basically takes the actual pixel values and multiplies them together. So basically it will always make things darker, but effectively what that means is usually I'm putting sort of a pink or purple color on top of the thing behind it. So this one I think is working better as this sort of peach color. And if you want to, you can just kind of adjust the opacity of the color itself here. But yeah, multiply, if you are going to learn how a blend mode works, this is the one that is probably easiest to understand and probably the most useful in my opinion. But if you just don't want to worry about it, that's also fine. because you can certainly do it in different ways as well. So like I could just create this specific color instead of worrying about using a blend mode to make it, but I do find that for shadows and shading and things like that, blend modes make things a little bit easier and I don't have to think about it quite as much. The other advantage of using blend modes for something like shading is you can change the base color and it will automatically still shade it just with that tint. So you don't have to change the color of both of those things kind of manually, if that makes sense. So let's use that same, actually I want this kind of gradient with that same multiply color, excuse me. Then we're going to switch to my move tool, get into multi-select here, and then just mask that shape here. That did change my order on me, which is fine. Let's go change this to multiply first. And just move those handles around a little bit. So I want that to be, I think, the strongest shadow up towards the top and then kind of weaken as we get down. So basically you have this curve of the jaw creating a strong shadow and then it sort of fades out as the light filters in a little bit more. Okay, so we're going to go back here and just grab this this head layer group, whatever you'd call this, and move it down here below the face, but above that collar shape. And so now we have that in the right place again. A lot of the time, the reason that your shapes will move when you mask things is because the kind of shadow that I created was at the top of my stack and the head was down below. So when I merged those into one thing, it has to decide to put them in one of those places. And in this case, it was on top. So pretty easy to fix, but just something to know. Okay, so, and then I'm going to start layering some shadows on this face to kind of create a nicer look. So basically I want a little bit of a highlight on this left side, because again, we talked about our light coming from up in the top left, sort of. So I'm just going to use the pencil shape because this is a pretty organic shape that I'm making here. I'll close that up, turn off the stroke shape and switch to this same gradient that we used before. So you can see in your colors menu, you get this history, by the way. So I'm kind of taking from that a lot of the time. But just above the palette at the bottom, there's this history. So that will keep your most recent 7 colors, gradients, whatever you've used. Okay, oops. So I'm going to choose that shape. Let's just put it down in the right place to start so we don't have to move things around again. So you can just drag it right onto that clipping group and that will automatically be clipped along with the neck shape that we made before. So I'm going to select that again and then just come in here and switch that to multiply as well. It's a little bit stronger than I'd like, so I'm just going to drag my my gradient handles out a little bit. Oops, let's see, make sure that's selected. And then because this gradient fades from a solid color to a translucent version of the same color, basically I can use that to kind of just create a gradient of how much shadow I want. And you can see that's kind of creating just a little bit of weirdness around the nose here. So let's go in, double tap on that to choose the shape. And then just kind of play with that a little bit. So I can either put it out past the nose entirely or try to hide it behind the nose. I think in this case, I want to hide it behind. So, oops, what am I doing here? If I want to keep that nose visible, by the way, I could mask that entire group. So let's just do that. We'll take this entire face and just put it right here. And now when I edit this, you can see that I can see the face with it. So even though I'm in isolation mode for that head, which is acting as a mask container, I can see the whole shape as we go, which is, let's see. And I might want to adjust kind of the direction of the shadow a little bit. So I think I actually want it to fade out more as we go down. So let's kind of change it to be a little bit more like that. So the shadow is stronger up at the top and then kind of fades out down towards the chin. And I do want to create just a little bit of shadow from that hair as well. So I'm just going to pull that out here. And then we can adjust that shape a little bit. Again, I'm trying not to spend too much time agonizing over the specific shapes here. If I had more time, I would probably spend more time fine-tuning that. I do want to make sure that the top of this nose shape matches the color of the face behind it with the shadow in place. So we're just going to choose this gradient tool, and then hopefully we can, no, that's not going to work. Okay, so I'll just kind of eyeball this then. Or maybe with the gradient, I can just kind of get it close enough by pulling that up a bit. No, that's probably okay for now. Okay, so that's good enough on the face, I think. Again, I'd probably spend more time on it if I had more time. But we'll just go with that for the moment. Okay, so I'm going to turn my sketch back on, and then let's start working on some of these like elbow and knee details and a little bit of shading on the limbs. So I'm going to go choose, let's do this arm on the left. I always get confused, so when I do name my layers, whether this is left arm or whether it's right arm, because it's her right arm, but on my left, and I just go back and forth on that. So I guess alternatively, you can just never name your layers and you don't run into that problem. That's probably not the best advice, actually. Okay, so let's just switch those two things and go use that same kind of orangish color again, peach color. And let's move this way down here so it's on top of that. And then I'm just sliding from left to right to select that. So if you want to do that instead of multi-select, that definitely works as well. And then I'm going to mask that shape, come in here and switch it to multiply. Okay, and then we'll do the same thing over here. Oops. Switch this to that same color. It probably was created at the top of my stack again, so I think there's a setting actually somewhere that would let me make it so my shapes are created above the selected shape instead of at the top of the stack. I'll go look for that in a second here, because that would make it so I don't have to keep moving things around like this. Okay, so if we turn off the sketch again for a second. Okay, so pretty happy with that. I might adjust the opacity of those elbow patches, whatever you'd call that, again, just a little bit. They might be a little too strong. But let's go look at the setting. So if you go into your settings here, and I think it's in input, no, let's see. Canvas, maybe, I just saw this somewhere. Here we go, insert elements above selected elements. Okay, well, I guess that's what's selected. So maybe I just didn't have it selected actually. Probably be why. Okay. And then let's create some shading for that arm, actually. So I have that piece selected, and I actually want that same color and everything. So let's just choose the pen tool here. And I should be able to just create that right on top. And then if I get out of, whoops, isolation mode, you can see now I have this. There we go. This arm shadow already there, which is kind of nice. I could spend some time kind of adding a little bit of gradient to that and kind of fine tuning it, maybe changing the opacity, but let's just try to get all of them in here first. So we'll go add this one over here. So again, if our light is coming from kind of the top left, we'll have just a little bit of, there we go, a shadow cast from that sleeve, and then kind of coming down this way. And then you'd probably have just a little bit of a highlight on the top of this hand and coming back like this. So something like that. So I do think with the way the gradient is already working on that arm, it's probably a little too orange down here. So let's go change the fill here to this gradient version. And with that move tool active, I can just move the different pieces of it. So you can see I have very little shadow down here and more shadow up at the top left here. So now it kind of ends up the same color at the bottom. And you can kind of mix your gradients this way, which I think can be a nice sort of subtle effect that way. Let's add a shadow shape to the hair as well. And I'm just going to be kind of making this one up. I did want to make this kind of fire hair. I don't think I'll have time really to get into too much of the details on that, but let's see how things go. Oh, that just really wants to put that there. But we're just kind of creating this sort of organic shape that kind of follows the curve of this hair along that edge. And then we'll just use this to select both of them, create that mask, go in, choose this guy, and switch it to multiply. Okay, so now we have kind of that nice strong hair shadow. And then let's get the kind of knee patches as well. Turn that sketch back on. Yeah, so that's where we want that one. I'll just use the pencil tool again. And I'm just kind of switching between these whenever I feel like it. Honestly, you don't even have to close the shape if you don't want to, but I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I'm going to do it. Let's switch to this, turn off the stroke, and go mask that. Put my knee up at the top again, which I don't want. I want it down here. And switch this one to multiply. So this can get a little repetitive. It's just sort of illustration for you though, unfortunately. It just takes a while to get things the way that you want them. So, okay, and then since we're in there, let's make a shadow shape on this leg as well. Just a tiny bit of overlap up at the top here. There we go. And then we'll do the same thing on that back leg as well. I want my sketch back though. Okay. There we go. And I have to keep reminding myself not to overwork these things because I gotta get through more of this. Oops. Okay, we want. No, I don't know how I did that. Oops. I think I just masked that to itself somehow. Okay, there we go. So I want both of those selected and then create the mask and then come in here and switch that to multiply. And then turn off my sketch layer to make sure that's looking okay. All right, so I am going to want another shadow shape on that because now these legs are sort of blending into each other a little bit, but I think this one's a little bit of a trickier spot to do the shadow, but I think what we want is basically just a little bit of a highlight up at the top here. And then the rest of it is probably in shadow. So something like that. If you want to be like really careful about creating shadows, like you can always go either shoot some reference, which is kind of fun, but a lot of work. Or you could create like a 3D model just with blocks and things like that and place some lights there, which is also a lot of work. So I don't know, I find it's easier to just sort of fake the shadows instead. Okay, I'm going to pretend I didn't see that weird little loop. Let's see, I think I did have some more shapes to add here. So we want these little bracelets. There's a few more details, and then we can kind of maybe start on the belt and some of the hair shapes if we have some time still, which looks like we have a little bit. Okay, so let's create these bracelets because I think they can be kind of fun to just add little details like this. So we're going to want Again, you could do this two different ways. So you could create an actual separate shape to go behind the arm, or you could just create one and just kind of line it up with the edge. Let's make a separate shape behind the arm, just because I think technically that's probably the better way to do it. But we'll just kind of line it up on this side. And, oops, refine that shape just a little bit. Somebody's asking, how long did it take you to create the original illustration? That's a really good question. I wish I knew exactly. It was probably 5 or 6 hours altogether, but I was also recording the process as I went, which does make things slower. So for something like this, I would guess maybe 5 hours when I have but I'm not counting the sketch time either. I don't know, 6 or 7 hours total maybe. Because also when I'm working on something like this, I do spend a lot more time getting the details exactly how I want them. So there's just a lot of time spent fiddling with exact curve shapes and exact shading and things like that that you don't necessarily see in that process video that I made, for instance, where a lot of that is just sort of okay, let's try to pick the pieces that are most interesting to watch, instead of what if we sit here and adjust the shape of this bracelet for half an hour, which I think might not be quite as interesting to people. Let's get that sketch back. And then somebody else asked, how long did it take to find your artistic style? Also a good question. I think artistic style is interesting because it's not really something you do intentionally, I think. There's some aspect of that to it where you're trying to find something that's sort of uniquely you, but you kind of just have to play with a lot of different things, and it evolves over time. So as far as my artistic style here in this moment, how long did it take me to find? I don't know, how long have I been drawing for? My whole life in one sense, but in another sense, how did I get to kind of where I'm at close enough now that I can create something that's sort of consistent? I think I sort of figured it out. I started working on it in school, and I was working with actual acrylic paints and this masking film. It's actually the stuff that you use to put on the inside of your drawers that you can buy at Target or something, and it's supposed to protect your drawers, but it's this slightly sticky, I think it's called contact paper. So I was putting that on top of an illustration board, and then cutting out shapes with an X-Acto knife and using acrylic to fill in the shapes from there. It was super tedious, but it definitely was kind of where this specific style that I'm working in now started. And then after school, I remember kind of figuring out okay, how I wanted to recreate that digitally in a way that felt a little more dynamic. And that was probably a year after school or something before I really got to somewhere where I felt I had something that looked unique to me. And then again, just kind of refining that as you go after that, and that takes quite a while. But like I said, it's definitely all a process. And how long that takes is just how long you give it, basically. I don't know. Hopefully that makes some sense. But I don't think it's something that you force. I think it's something that you just explore different things and try to look at a lot of different types of art, try a lot of different things, and eventually you'll kind of land on something that feels unique to you. And I think that, again, that kind of comes back to that amalgamation of your life experience, if that makes sense, which sounds a little feel goody, but really that's what makes your artistic voice your own, is sort of you're the only one who's had this specific experience in life that you have, and you're the only one that can put all of those different parts of you together into one thing. And I think that's the more important thing than any specific rendering style, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's work on those hair details because they're a little bit more fun than the dress details, probably. So we've got kind of some lines that we've created here earlier, and we have our shading, but I want to create a few highlights and maybe a few darker and lighter patches in the hair here. So first of all, I kind of want this shape to kind of come out as its own piece, so it doesn't just sort of fade in there. So I'm going to start here and create a shape that, again, we're going to be using that clipping mask. So we don't have to worry about what it looks like outside of there. Just need to worry about the parts that will be visible. And then let's have that come up to maybe here, and we're going to use some sort of, oh, look, it's already a clipping mask. That's super nice. We'll use some sort of gradient to fade out on this end, and it will be a little lighter over here. So I'm going to go find wherever that shape I just made went. Let's turn this off for now, just so we can see what we're doing. And then I'm going to switch to that move tool so I can change the gradient handles. I don't know why that's doing that. There we go. And bring that one over here and this one over here. And then, so now I have kind of a gradient on that side, so you can see it kind of feels like a different piece of the whole thing. And then I also want to darken this little section behind a little bit. So we'll do that same thing. Just kind of grab our pen tool and create another shape here. And in this one, I'm just going to go choose a darker color that I already have. That might be a little too dark, so actually I'm just going to change the opacity of the color. I think that works okay. And if we wanted to, we could also do that down here. So let's go create that same shape just here. And because it's behind this layer I just made, I don't have to worry about the shape on that one at all, honestly. So now I have two little pieces there. And then let's just use the pencil tool to kind of have fun with some of these other ones. So I want kind of a dark shape altogether here, I think. So I'm just going to go in here with the pencil. Let's switch that to maybe like this gradient that I already have, turn off that stroke. And oh, I'm back to stroke for some reason. Whoops. Okay, we'll change it in a second. Okay, and just go refine my shape first. Let's just delete that one, and we will switch to pen tool and finish that out. Again, I'm going to double tap that to switch it to a double-sided curve there with two handles, two symmetrical handles, I guess. And then this one is a little more important to refine the shape just to make sure that it kind of lines up. Let's swap that fill and stroke so we can see what we're doing a little bit better. And maybe even turn off the sketch just to kind of keep that visible. And then make sure it is captured in that mask. Okay, so like we want to make sure that that lines up with this little curve or with this little corner here, so you don't have like weird overlap. And then actually, you know what, I'm going to match that to this same, oh, we'll see, maybe I can't do that. Let's do a, well, I could, it would just take a minute. Let's switch this to something like this, where I have a gradient that's solid on one side and transparent on the other side. So I'm going to go make sure my solid side is up on the top. And then I want it to be a little bit more yellow, so I'll go back into my colors, choose the solid side, and just kind of brighten that and saturate that up a little bit. So now we have that shape coming in here. And then I think let's add just a couple of, I want kind of a darker shape on this side actually, and then a couple of highlights maybe here and up here or something like that. So again, we're just going to choose that pen tool and start a shape here. Just kind of bring it up and around. And we can just put this behind these pieces again, so I don't have to worry about matching the shape up. So I'll just bring that down here. We might have to worry about it a little bit because I got lazy and just used the opacity there instead of choosing a color I actually wanted. Whoops. So we'll make sure that matches. Again, this probably isn't the best way to do things. I probably should go change the color of that so you can like hide different pieces behind each other, just in case you want to move things later, but this will work for now. So let's do something like that. And again, we're just kind of using that gradient tool to Make it darker in some places and lighter in some other places. I don't actually quite like that color I chose there, so let's go in and choose something else. We'll just use this multiply tool again, and switch that to multiply. So sorry, this gradient, and multiply it. So now we have kind of this nice, more saturated orange there. And then I'm going to just, I haven't really shown the brush tool, so maybe we should actually try that for a second here. So I'm going to choose this brush. You can change the size of it. And then make sure we're going to want that to be stroke instead of fill. So let's switch to stroke here. I think strokes cannot be gradients if I'm remembering right. Oops. And we'll just say swap fill and stroke, which may not work, but okay, something like that. And then I should be able to just create this nice shape that has some different line variation to it. So for that, let's turn my sketch back on and just kind of create something like this. Actually, let's go the other direction so it kind of fades out down there. Kind of same thing here. And we will go change these to a different color. That's actually, I only want to change this one to a different color. So let's make that a little bit lighter. And then we're going to drop those back in here. And then, so now we have some kind of interesting, just sort of more naturalistic shapes in there. This one I want to adjust. Again, we just want to make sure that it kind of matches up with that corner a little bit better. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just so it doesn't look like a weird suddenly stops shape there. And then I did want just a couple more kind of highlighty looking shapes here. So we should create those like this, just kind of along the edge. And once we turn that shadow back on, we might want to adjust these just in case they like overlap in weird ways or something. That one's doing that same thing. Okay. And let's just change this to kind of this gradient we already have here. Oops. And then we will make sure we pull it into that masking group. So something like that. And let's turn our shadow back on. So you can see that's kind of a little weird along some of these other shapes that we have. So we'll go in here and just sort of start adjusting that. And I might want to change the shape of the shadow because I think it might be a little too saturated. So actually, let's go make sure that that is using that same gradient so we can just kind of use it a little bit in places instead of having it be so extreme looking. But maybe something like that. So it's a little lighter along the edge and then kind of darkens as we go down. And I think that looks pretty good. And I could spend more time again on that hair, and we could get it to a place where it's a little better looking, but I think it's probably fine for now. So let's go create some of the shading and details on the dress, I think. I think we only have a few minutes left. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to throw those in the chat now. I think we're going until 10:30 Pacific time. So we don't have a lot of time left here, but I could get a little bit more detail on some of this. So maybe if we just add this belt and then add a little bit of shading here or something like that. I think we should have time for that. And I think in the original one I made this red just to kind of mix things up, so not every kind of detail piece of the dress is that same blue color. Let's see. So we'll just do that. I need to bring this down here so I can mask it with the dress, which is down here. So we'll select both of those and then just hit this mask icon. So because they're the same color, you can't see it right now, but I'm going to go change this to a red color. And then we'll just add this buckle really quickly. You can just create that right here. Let's see. You can trying not to worry too much about the exact shape here, but it's hard to suppress the instinct. Yeah, something like that, that'll work. And then for the actual shadow shape, this can be a little tricky with like a more complex shape like this. But we'll just kind of take our best guess. So we're going to want some sort of highlight right here, right? Because that lake kind of comes out in front, which means that this is probably going to be in shadow, which means maybe a little bit of a highlight here, kind of coming out, shadow here, highlight here, and then shadow from the head on this side, but maybe a little bit of highlight there. This definitely takes some practice to kind of get to a point where you have any idea what this should look like. This part's tricky. So we're going to have kind of an arm shadow, but also maybe a highlight. Might have to come back to that part in a second. So let's change this to the color that actually makes sense. So again, I'm going to be using that multiply blend mode to make this look okay. Let's turn off the sketch for a second so we can see if that's kind of reading at all. I think that might be a little dark, but overall it's kind of working. But again, we have this sort of weird situation where we want a little bit of a highlight and a little bit of a shadow. So maybe I'll just make this top part highlighted. I'm not sure if that's exactly how that would work, but should work okay for now. So we're just going to kind of take this, start changing these shapes a little bit. So I'm just using this node tool to kind of dynamically add pieces to my path. And you can zoom in to get those details a little closer to what you want. Make sure that lines up. And you know what? This is actually a bad way to do this because I want a little bit of a gradient here. So we're going to create a new shape on top of that instead. So let's go back to that pen tool. And we'll just kind of create this shape out here. And instead of multiply, we're going to change that back to normal. And then we want to make it primarily the base dress color, which I think is this. And then we're going to switch to gradient. So we'll just have that kind of fade out on the side. So it looks something like that. I'll turn off that sketch, and that works okay. But I think we're pretty much out of time. So if anybody has any last second questions, feel free to throw those in here. But from here, I would add some more like secondary shadows. So I'd add some little kind of occlusion shadows in like the crevice of the arm here, maybe something down here, same with the knees. Add a little bit more detail like this belt buckle, maybe a little bit more highlights and things like that, some secondary shadows around the arms. Maybe spend some more time fine tuning some things. And of course I would spend more time on the background. But yeah, mostly this is pretty close. So this is kind of, a lot of the time I'll, okay, and a lot of the time I'll, when you're working on something like this, it's easy to kind of have your artwork go through sort of an ugly phase. And I think this is kind of coming out the other side of that, where it's starting to look pretty good. Like I've got a lot of my shading and things in there, and it's at a place where I can kind of see where I want to take it. And I think it's going to work out pretty well. So thanks everybody for coming, and thanks for your questions, and hopefully that was helpful. But it's been a good time. Thanks.